Also, our conversation or our discussions will examine the African Union Master Roadmap of practical steps to silence the gangs, which was initially promulgated in 2020, but has been now extended to 2030, in challenges of persistence of political denials in situations of brewing political crisis. An important aspect of this election denial situation is the consideration of early warning signs of cases of elections denials as early warning on looming crisis. So we've seen situations in what? Which country was that? In Sierra Leone, where there were election denials, and within a month, there was an attempted coup d'etat. So we are going to look at all these things within the context of what is happening in what? In Chad, because there was an election, then the opposition claimed to be the winner, and they are now also denying the outcome of the election. So we shall look at that also. Right. So to our listeners, and viewers on the various social media platforms around the world, the Sankofa African webinar is anchored on a myriad of perspectives. So there may be differences and opinions from our guests based on their expertise, knowledge, and experiences. The differences in opinion does not necessarily mean perspectives and thoughts shared are wrong, but reflect a divergence of ideas to address security challenges facing the African continent. The webinar relies on narratives for its discussion programs. Narratives, as we know, are an integral part of African societies. And in our discussions, we utilize them based on research findings, policy positions, and realities prevailing in various African countries. The narratives help our panelists to present their perspectives independently, and which sometimes may diverge from official government or organization policy positions, right? So the narrative help them, not necessarily that they have to state their organization position, but they can have independent thought that they can present over here. Today, we are joined by experts from academia, civil society, and non-governmental organizations to help us dive into the topic. Some of our experts are practitioners or they are scholars on the topic. So we have 4 panelists today. We have Dr. Anta Saini, who is a political scientist and General Secretary of the Economic, Social, and Environmental Council of Senegal. She is joining us from Dakar. Welcome, Dr. Anta Saini.
Thank you.
Yeah, then we have Dr. Lassane Odrago. Did I get it right?
Oh, it's Lassane, yeah.
Lassane Odrago, yeah. He's a research fellow, Center for Democracy and Development, West Africa, joining us from Burkina Faso. I think earlier on, Mr. Idris Mohammed joined us, but I don't know what happened to his line. We are looking forward to having Mr. Valerie Najibi, Senior Program Officer for the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, for Central Africa, including Chad, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. So before we welcome opening remarks from our panelists, we want our listeners to know that the Sankofa African webinar is brought to you by courtesy of Bell & Associate Consulting Limited Ghana in collaboration with Budget IT Ghana. So let's take a minute to play a promotional advert of our organizers before we come to the opening remarks. So Nancy, if you are ready, can you play the promotional advert for us before we welcome the opening remarks from our panelists? So thank you so much, Nancy. Right. So now let's go into the opening remarks from our panelists. Now, like I said, right, we want to be able to cater for the English-speaking and the French-speaking audience. So feel free if you want to speak in both English and French, so long as you can be able to translate for us, right? Because we're talking with the African audience, so we want to make sure you feel very comfortable in presenting your submission. So feel free to switch anytime. So let's start with you, Dr. Lassani first. Your opening remarks. Unmute yourself. Unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much for inviting me to join this conversation. The more we talk about these issues, the more we are able to bring to light different views, different interpretations, and hopefully contribute one way or the other to the advancement of our understanding of African issues. So I appreciate the initiative from having Africans talk about African issues. Fellow Ghanaians, Senegalese, Nigerians, Burkinabe, sitting together this evening and reflecting on what is going on in Chad, because what everything is happening in Chad is also an issue that is affecting us in Ghana. It's an issue that is affecting us in Senegal. It's something that is going to affect us in Nigeria, in Burkina Faso, and elsewhere across the continent. So my opening remark is, first of all, show of gratitude for being invited to join you to the conversation, but also to thank you and encourage you for the initiative and encourage you to fly to shore really high. And after saying that, what I will add is that the history of Chad, as I mentioned earlier, is quite a tragic history. From independence in 1960 to 20.
Okay, hold on first, right? Let's go to Dr. Anta, and I'll come back to you again briefly. Okay. Dr. Anta, your opening remarks briefly. Dr. Anta and myself were in the PhD program, just to put it on the record, right? We were in a PhD program together, so we have a history. And this is a third or fourth time she's appeared on the program, right? So Dr. Anta, your opening remarks before we delve into the conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Benjamin. Saying hello to everyone, all the viewers and listeners. Also saying hello to Mr. Wedwago. It's a pleasure to be once again part of this program. I think it's a wonderful platform that we have here, as Mr. Wedwago said, to be able to discuss, African issues and see how we can bring our contributions to what is happening. So congratulations to you, Mr. Akwe, Dr. Akwe, and all of your team for setting up this stage to allow us to do that. I'm very proud of you. And again, I'm very happy to join you and be able to discuss on this issue. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, right? Yeah, I think earlier on, Mr. Idris did join us. I don't know, Nigeria having their own internet problem over there. I've been trying to reach Mr. Najibi, but I've not been able to get hold of it. But we can go into the program. So thank you for joining us. Like I said, we use narratives. So I've sent you the narratives already. So I will not read the entire narratives, but I'll read portions of the narrative. Then we'll dive into the issues. So the first narrative is on what? The narrative on the current democratic challenges being the result of a tenuous political crisis created by the 2004 constitutional amendment. The current situation that we are having, we can trace as far back as 2004, right? So that narrative was sent to Dr. Lassani, right? So let me read you a portion of where I want you to start the discussion. So to summarize, in terms of what happened from 2004, to summarize, it can be argued that the concentration of power in Derby's hands increased corruption, the militarization of his regime, and the systematic repression of opposition leaders to constitute a serious threat to sustainable peace in Chad. But most worrying of all is the president's adamant refusal to find a negotiated political solution to the country's problem through negotiations with both civilian parties and rebel movements. Derby's strategy has always consisted in signing separate agreements with civilian opposition groups and armed movements. By doing so, he seeks to avoid the creation of a platform of all opposition groups against him. Part of this attitude is due to the strong support the president receives from important international actors. The outcome is that he is sowing the seeds of the further institutionalization of coups as a political instrument in his country. So this was during the time that Senior Derby was in office. Right. Now, let's come to the narrative for you to delve into, right? There's a school of thought who share the view that during the political and transitional period, so now we are now in the new Derby, right? The political transitional period, when Mohammed Derby, son of Idris Derby, took over as the head of state, when he dissolved Chad political institutions and suspended the constitutions. As the head of state, according to an article published by the Africa Center for Strategic Studies on November 28, 2023, Mohammed Derby failed to listen to the opposition, who have long advocated for a transition to a federal system as a means of diffusing power to local authorities in this expansive country. The issue of federalism received considerable attention during the Inclusive Sovereign National Dialogue, DNIS, resulting in a resolution that the question of whether to shift to a federal system would be included in the referendum. Despite this, the December 17 referendum did not address the federalism issue. It solely asked voters to accept or reject draft constitutions, which specify a unitary state. There was also accusations of lack of transparency around the audit and voter registration, that even the Chadian Alliance for Democracy and Development, a party aligned to Derby, criticized the exclusion of political parties from the process following the audit. Now, the question to you, given that Chad is a factionalized and rebellious society, that during the 31 years reign of Idris Deby, power was concentrated in his hands, will you agree with experts and advocates of democracy that the way and manner that Mohammed Derby controlled the referendum process, such as the political transition, lacked significant opposition representation? All commissioners of the National Commission charged with the organization of the constitutional referendum were appointed by Derby and were exclusive regime representatives and members of the transitional legislation. And finally, the strong regional international backing that Derby got appeared to be a continuation of his effort to cement and extend his father's legacy during the transitional period. Would you agree to that assertion?
Thank you, Prof. Yeah, Prof. Those analysis, that narrative that you just provided here summarizes the extent to which the tragedy, the very historical tragedy that is unfolding in Chad can be projected in years to come. And to me, to respond to your question, I won't even begin to look at it from 2015 on. We have to go all the way back to the 1900s, when the French colonized and occupied that land. It was a militarized land, although it was not seen as an important element in the configuration, in the colonial configuration of France. It's still, even in the naming of that colony, I might be speaking here under the control of Dr. Sen, but if you look at how French colonialism categorized different nations, it kind of like gives you a blueprint of what those nations would become after the independence. So that militarized the nation was colonially, it was a militarized nation. So it was not a surprise that when Tumbleby came to power in 1960, quickly he will face a rebellion. He will face various factions militarily seeking to seize power. And that first leader will end up being killed in office. And the tragedy that will continue to unfold will lead from a successive leader to another up to Idris Deby, who would actually firmly hold the nation through his political party. Of course, at some point, there was a sense of democracy, elections, but never have the Chadian people been able to freely express plural democracy in the sense of having multiple parties freely competing for power. And when Father David died in battle and his son came to power, the transition was handled the same way. So clearly, there has not been any discontinuity in the ways in which Chad has been led since independence. It has been some discontinuity in the sense in the men who are at the head of the state, but the political violence has continued to be the same replication of what we have seen under Isen Abre, what we have seen under Father Deby, and now son Deby Jr. And Deby Jr. has not really opened the game, honestly, even when he was calling in Succès Masra to come in and serve as a prime minister. And we can also look into how international actors have utilized Chad as a power, sort of as a power to go against Nigeria on one side, against Sudan on the other side, against Mali at times. And Chad is this nation that is just laying there in the middle of Africa and not actually being able to affirm, to open up and allow Chadians to come in and say, look, we might want to go with this kind of political proposition rather than this other political proposition. So it's a movement. So basically what I'm trying to arrive at is to make this statement that the tragedy of Chad is that Chad is led by a group of people. It's not just Deby. It's not just the Deby family. If today General Mahamad Deby is not in control, we are going to have someone from the same movement, the patriotic movement that his father has utilized over the past 30 years to come again and maintain that system. So until folk from that same organization, that internal organization, have the will to liberate Chad, to open the political game, to say, look, we are now living in 2024, and Chadians finally have to have a voice, have to have a say in the ways in which the country is managed. Then nothing is going to be what we want to see in Chad. So perhaps I will yield the floor back to you now and welcome further questions or contradictions from that.
Let me follow up before I go to Dr. Hanta, right? Now, if you look at the history, let's look at the history of the Sahel in general, with the exception of Senegal, right? Let's look at both those countries, probably the coastal West African region and the Sahel, right? You see there's an Islamic factor. If you look at Burkina Faso, if you look at Mali, if you look at Niger, and if you look at Chad, right? These are countries where you have what they call a Muslim population, and they tend to push back, right? Is it that the West is trying to push their own form of democracy, right, onto these countries? And these countries are fighting back because they are more or less a traditional society. and they are fighting back that, okay, yeah, even though we want democracy, but we don't want that Western style of democracy. What if you look at it, what the French did in some of these countries, right? They tend to be a little bit scornful of these Islamic groups. So wouldn't you think that they are only trying to push back the Western style of democracy?
Actually, that argument about the religiosity or the religious configuration of the Sahel, I hear it at times, but I do not really buy into Muslim pushing against democratization process. Because when you look at the Sahel, broadly, Muslims constitute a political minority, a marginalized political minority, if we want to unpack it that way. And those ones you can actually trace it back to the colonial era when you know, to become a Muslim, to get educated meant to leave Islam aside and become a Christian, because schools were run by the Catholic missionaries. That would be the case of Upper Volta, for example, whereby when the French first came in, the first schools were actually run using Arabic scripture. And at some point, the French said, look, you cannot colonize and dominate the people using another person's language as a language of instruction. Therefore, they switched back to French as a language of instruction. And that is when missionaries had to play a major role in the education process. And the Muslim clergy that fought against the French, whether it's in Mali or in Burkina Faso, would not agree to send their children to school, because sending your child to school meant losing your child, because he will literally become Christian. That would be completely different from Senegal, whereby the Sufi order, the Sufi tradition has been deeply Africanized, if we can say it so. And it did not, although at some point there was a friction between Sufi leaders and the colonial administration at independence, or the decades leading to independence in Senegal, the colonial administration actually found in the Sufi leaders an ally. They found in them allies to actually work, whether in the production of peanut or in the conscription of Africans to go and fight in World War I, in World War II. You needed to have a sense of leadership in to use the leadership structure that the Sufi leaders have ingrained and established in Senegal. Whereas in places like Burkina Faso, back then Muslims were not strongly organized as in Mali, although they were a majority. Actually, they were a minority. Muslims became a majority during the colonial administration as a way of rejecting French colonialism and French colonial practices. Because becoming a Christian meant becoming French. It meant becoming moving away from your tradition as a Muslim, and so on and so forth. So at independence, Muslims were literally not part of the management architecture of the nations. So it's only maybe in the 1980s, 1990s that we began to have leaders educated in the Western sense that claim Muslimhood, that is backed by research and evidence for the case of Burkina Faso. So sometimes when we make an argument that there's a push against democracy, liberal democracy, because these societies are Muslim societies, I don't subscribe to that argument. I rather see an undoing of a political system that is put in place, not just by Christians. No, it's not put in place by the Christian, although leadership might be Christian in the majority, but those Christians would not discriminate against you because you are Muslim. No, they would not elect, and actually those who are electing those Christians are Muslims. So Blaise Compaoré has ruled Burkina Faso for 27 years and has been elected, and it was loved in the Muslim circles more than in any other circle. So it's difficult to see it under that kind of configuration.
All right, so let's go to Dr. Anta. I want your take on this thing, right? With the exception of Senegal, right? If you look at these three countries we're talking about, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad, the French had strong influence over there. And if you look at the democracy that started spreading across Africa in the 1990s, what we call the third way of democracy, it did not actually impact Burkina Faso. It did not actually impact Chad. What could have been the reason if you take the Muslim factor out? What could have been the reason why, right, this democratization was not able to be consolidated in Chad as compared to the other countries?
Thank you, Ben. So you mentioned that, well, maybe I did not get it properly for technical reason, but if I understood correctly, I heard you mentioned that to the exception of Senegal, that does have or does not have French influence, because we have French influence here in Senegal, and still have French interest, whether in the economic areas or military, still here in Senegal. But as both of you mentioned, I think Chad is very different, like with how that French influence actually, the consequences of the French influence regarding the democratic process in Chad. I think it has been centered on most definitely natural resources. I think that was one of the key pieces in Chad, that actually and inequities regarding those resources distributed on the Chad populations. And that's why we have seen a militarized state since then, and still have that French influence in Chad, with more than thousands French militaries still being there.
Okay, but let me follow up again, right? If you look at the history of Chad since 1990, right, there has always been that conflict between the North and the South, and those in the middle belt, which is a little bit different from what happened in Sudan. In the Sudan, it was the North and the South, and the South. The North was more Muslim or Islamic, and the South was more animism or Christian. In the case of Chad, the North is Muslim, but the middle belt is a combination. Then the South, then Chad. So, do you think that the issue of federalism, if they had moved towards federalism, that could have helped with resolving some of the conflict, instead of having a unitary system where power will be consolidated in the hands of the Southerners, right?
Well, Chad is mainly Muslim, so I don't think that will have an impact, because most of the Chadian people are Muslim, but ethnicities also play a big role between those who have been in power for a long time, and whether they're from the north, the region, or actually south of the region.
All right, so let's come to Dr. Lassani. What do you have to say about that? If you look at the dichotomy between Chad and what happened in Sudan, that's led to the split, right? Chad seems to be a little bit different compared to what happened in the Sudan. What is your take on that? Should they have offered to go federalism, right? To be able for them to have the North to have some sort of autonomy, then the Middle Belt have some sort of autonomy, then the South also have some sort of autonomy, right? A federal government, instead of having this unitary government where power will still be concentrated in the hands of what? The Northerners.
I think, honestly, federalism could have helped manage the country better than it is doing right now. Simply, the reason I'm advancing this is because the nation is taken hostage by a group of people. Of course, those people are coming from, and they're backed by some, ethnicity, and, it's not strictly region-based, but it's purely interest-based backing. So federalism could, in what sense could federalism allow to fight that kind of hostage taking, is that it allows decentering power, allowing people from the North, people from the South to exercise a certain level of power that is not concentrated in the capital city, in N'Djamena. Out of 16 or 17 million, how many people live in N'Djamena? Less than 2 million. And most of the resources, most of the services, most of the benefits of the natural resources come to benefit people who are concentrated in N'Djamena. So, and if you want to be part of that that group of people who have access to those resources, so you have to join that political movement. And once you're part of that political movement, and it's a political movement, and I don't like talking about ethnicity and tribalism, but in Chad, that is part of the Chadian history. Tribalism and ethnicity is part of the Chadian political configuration. And that is why quickly when Deby died, he was not succeeded by the right man, the one who, the head of the parliament, who is also part of that kind of configuration. He's part of the group, but the Chadian system seems to give priority to the son and not letting the institutional backed man to take over. If that was the case, if power was not handed down to Deby, if power was handed down to the president or parliament, regardless of the fact that parliament is also controlled by the Deby party, we would have had an opportunity to, at least in a nominal way, to say that we are moving toward democracy. But
yes,
there, where we see the discontinuity or the continuity of the system that was put in place in the 1960s, that was disrupted in the 1990s, and that was further reinforced by Idris Deby. The continuity of that system, we saw it the day when Deby was killed. If there was an opportunity to discontinue that, we would have seen him, we would have seen power switch hands and gone to the institution the head of the institution that was supposed to take over power. But we didn't witness that. And unfortunately, the international community kind of like blessed it.
Yeah, let me get, we are not yet into the San Deby yet. We'll look at the election later on. We just want to understand some of these things. But if you are looking at federalism, right there is Nigeria, right? We see what is happening in Nigeria, right? So how do you make that justification that they should have transitioned to federalism, knowing very well that they are saying what is happening in Nigeria between the North and the South and people they see these sort of problems, right? So do you think maybe they made a right decision to stick with a unitary system, seeing what is happening with their neighbor Nigeria?
Exactly. In the history of Africa, Nigeria stands as an outlier, preventing us from making any argument in favor of federalism, because federalism, to some extent, is a failure in Nigeria. Although it prevents Nigerians from actually confronting, we don't have a South-North physical battle whereby, armed forces from the North are battling armed forces from the South. At least we don't have that. In a nominal way, Nigerians go to the poll, elect the governors, and governors get together, party dispensation of power. It's happening at the regional level, and fighting to get who is going to go to power. When President Tinubu says, "This is my turn," he really meant this was my turn. This is a symbol of the failure of federalism, of course. So that prevents us from accurately making an argument in favor of federalism as a power mechanism, power sharing mechanism that would have allowed Chad to at least emerge as to pacify Chad. Chad need pacification, because the major thing with Chad is the fact that Chad is at war against Chad. Chadians, when you listen to the Chadians in the diaspora, oftentimes when I was in Washington, D.C., I would see diaspora community mobilized and protest and go to the White House, and when you listen to them and the ideas that they are proposing, you have a sense that, and sometimes I do discuss with some of those leaders in the diaspora, they have a sense that power is concentrated in the hands, not necessarily of an ethnic group, not necessarily in the hands of a political of a region, a regional bloc, but in the hands of a political elite, hooligans, if we can call them so, that don't care much about the well-being or the future of Chad as a nation. What is most important to Déby over his 30 years or 3 decades of rule is what? How to consolidate power, how to make sure nobody can take power out of his hands. And at the same time, he's fighting against terrorism. He's fighting against rebel groups. He is trying to do development work. He's trying to position Chad as a power broker in Sudan. He's trying to position Chad as a power broker in Cameroon. He is even reaching toward what is his other neighbor? Libya.
Central African Republic, right? We have Central African Republic. Somalia over there, we have Mali over on the other side.
Yeah, so the point is, why can't the elite in Chad trust that in a democratic process, we can have a system whereby the distribution of goods and services is decentered, whereby, and Chad is a huge nation, almost 1.2, or if I'm correct, 1.2 million square kilometers. It is huge, and Chad is among the largest nations in this world, maybe in the 20, 25 largest nations in this world, not Africa. Right. So this is huge for a country that is among the largest in terms of land mass, the 25 largest nations in this world. How many federations do we have in this world? Although that kind of argument too might find limitations, but still, if Chad had tried, or if the current president would be open to a form of decentralization, some of the people who are fighting against him, the opposition leaders might be governors in some regions, and they might contribute to opening the political game, allowing more Chadians to trust the system.
Right. Let me go to Dr. Anta. Right, I want you to make a comparative analysis between what happened in Senegal and Chad, because if you look at Senegal, there is always a history of democracy. Senegal has a history of democracy historically. But if you look at the situation in Chad, there has never been a history. You can go back as far back as the 1960s. After 1960, there were coup d'etats throughout. Then Idriss came back in 1990 and he consolidated power. So in that situation, it would be very, very difficult to initiate a democratic process because the society itself is a very violent society, armed groups. So would you say that because of its history, it will be very, very difficult? We'll come to the way forward. It will be very, very difficult for Chad to accept the Western style of democracy. Would you say that?
Well, Benjamin, Dr. Akwe, before that, I just wanted to add regarding that question of federalism that it's actually a very old debate in Chad. And if we go back to the conference back in 1993, where that question was central, and a compromise was pretty much found between the two Chads, one that actually demanded a federal Chad, and the other side that wanted a more unitary Chad. And you have two sides for some who actually want federalism and others who are against it. Okay, and the yes side actually, the yes side, which actually advocates for federalism, prone national unity and cohesion, okay, amongst Chadians, mentioning that Chad must remain one and indivisible, okay? And because if you do the contrary, that can be a source of divisions among the Chadian people, okay? The no actually wanted to, the supporters of the no said that there were no other initiative than to move towards a federal Chad. Because federalism can advocate for more equal opportunities between citizens and perhaps, restore that justice, equity, and the redistribution of resources in Chad. And just also to mention that the debate regarding federalism was also brought recently, okay, when there was the referendum that was proposed last year, back in December, whether to move forward that unitary type of state or federalism, okay? And it was up to the Chadian people through that referendum to choose between the two. And at the end, the government made one choice instead of the two for the Chadian people to choose, and they chose to have like the unitary decentralized state, okay? And you still have up to today one part of Chad that still claims federalism over there. Now, when it comes to democracy, I think it's important to mention that this recent election that we had with Debbie's son being elected, we have to praise and applaud the fact that it was a democratic process. The Chadian people decided calmly to go vote on that day and chose their president. So I think it's a first step, because if we see what happened, the military transition took about 3 years in Chad. So it was not. It could have gone the other side as well. That we had more troubles during these elections. So this way that the Chadian people went on these elections and decided who they wanted, show that they done it their way and wanted elections in a very calm situation, which is very different from what happened in the past. As far as whether they will do the Western type of democracy, I don't think so. Even though you still have a French influence in Chad, I don't think that they will copy literally the way democracy is done there, because there are many things, okay, around that word democracy and the way things are managed. But we have to praise and applaud the fact that for this first time after the 3-year military transition, we can say today that Chad went through a democratic process that has been very peaceful. And I think for the upcoming elections, the legislative elections that are coming up before the end of the year, it will be up to the Chadian people as well as the new president to make sure that they set the stage to continue on that process and allow the Chadian people to go ahead and be able to vote freely and have transparent elections as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hunter. Now, since you brought the issue of elections, right, I want us to move to the next narrative, right? The next narrative is on a post-President Idris Deby era, whereby you have to seek political consensus towards democratic consolidation. I sent you the narratives, so I'm just going to read just a small portion of it, right? So the checkered course of the last 50 years suggests that for the foreseeable future, no leader's position in Chad is ever likely to be more than superficially stable. It would be unwise to assume that the post-Deby era, when it comes, will be the product of a peaceful, smooth transition of power. This is an analysis that is being made before his death. So let's come to what has just really happened. In the recently held presidential elections on Monday, May 6, 2024, opposition candidates led by former Prime Minister and head of the transitional government, Success Masri, after first declaring himself winner of the elections, even though he filed paperwork challenging President Mohamed Idris' victory. Chad's Constitutional Council confirmed Thursday on May 16, 2024, that President Mohamed Deby, who seized power in 2021, was elected president in the May seat vote and rejected an appeal by his main opponent. Now, my question to you, at this point, what practical steps should a new president take amid the election denial? Because the opposition are denying the elections. What practical steps should he take to promote political consensus between the opposition parties on cardinal issues in the management of the affairs of the state to avoid that superficial instability that we're talking about? What practical steps should he take going forward?
Thank you, Dr. Akwe. I think the opposition accepted finally the results of the election. And I believe Success Maswa himself, made a statement that everything that was introduced in terms of Chadian law in order to change the result of the election did not actually change. So he accepted the results. So I think, like I mentioned earlier, after this military transition of 3 years and having the president being elected, one of the steps, the first one, of course, after he's being sworn in, will be, I believe, to get all the political actors to continue to pursue the dialogue among all of the actors, like to ensure that you still have this dialogue done in a spirit of openness as well as cohesion in order to face the country's challenges. It will be very important to have everyone around the table um, to continue on with that spirit of unity for the Chechen people. Now, it will be very interesting to see whether Success Maswa, who was the prime minister for the past 4 months, will be again the new prime minister. That would be a positive signal, I believe, for Chechen people if that was that case scenario, because they'll be able to show that despite all of these elections and the results, they accepted them, but they will work together for the interest of, like the Chechen people. But at the same time, with the legislative elections coming up, normally before the end of the year, it will probably be unlikely that he may be the prime minister of Chad. But regardless, he needs to be at the table with the president and civil society, as well as the other opponent leaders, to actually talk about how to strengthen transparency as well as inclusiveness for the upcoming legislative elections. Continue the dialogue, open up the government, why not, to have some of these opponents joining, because what is important is the Chechen people. What is at interest is how to face all of those challenges that Chad is dealing with. So continuing and pursuing a dialogue, consultation among the actors. They've done it. Chad is used to do national dialogue, and that should be the first step, I believe, for him, and continue an ongoing conversation with everyone to make sure that we don't go back to the old days of maybe having coups or anything close to that. Being very open to listening to everybody to continue to maintain that democratic process and peace in Chad.
All right, I'll come back to you. Let me go to Dr. Nassani, right? I'll come back to Dr. Anta. Now, I want to follow up, right? The African Union has what they call early warning signs of political crisis, and one of them is election denial. We saw that in Sierra Leone, right? That there was an election and the opposition or the losing party denied, and within a month, there was an attempted coup in Sierra Leone. So that's why I'm trying to ask the question that since we had an election denied earlier on, right, what real practical steps should maybe AU, ECOWAS, right, and the new Chadian president do to be able to bring all these parties together, right, to be able to find what they call a consensus, a compromise in terms of how to move forward? Well, it is very interesting whenever what an opposition leader denies an election, right? Then you should know, given the history of Chad, right? You know, at least you should be able to foresee what could happen, just like what we saw in Sierra Leone. What do you have to say to that? Unmute yourself, unmute your microphone.
So first, I'd like to mention that there's a rain about to fall here, and oftentimes when it's raining, we lose power and then we lose internet. And so let me apologize in advance if that were to happen in the next few minutes.
Sure.
So, of course, the challenge in Chad in terms of moving forward, in terms of arriving at a peaceful political dispensation, is the fact that for many years, when you live under dictatorship, when you live under political violence of all kinds and there's no justice, it is difficult, even when you have the political will, to bring people together and have new beginnings, because the people that you're relying on to help you run your nation, the people that you're relying on to help you win elections, whether it's presidential elections or legislative elections, are the people who have been part of the different governments and who have been part of the not the receiving hand, but the dispensing hand of violence, political violence. Victims are still part of this process, and victimhood is part of the tragedy that I mentioned earlier. So how can the African Union or any regional bloc come in and actually help Chad advance democratically? Would also involve talking about transitional justice. And justice is not something that you can come in and serve in one day. Under former President Hissène Habré, who eventually was sentenced and to Senegal and taken to Senegal, and I believe, and so victims of his 30 plus years or his tenure are still there, claiming for justice. When President Deby came to power, political violence continued in Chad. Victims are still asking and calling for justice. During this recent transition, it created a lot of unhappiness, a lot of victims who are also calling for justice. I think one of the ways in which the African Union or any regional bloc could contribute in helping Chad is to actually have the courage to address those victimhood. It's not coming back and paying people money or doing this, but acknowledging that there has been people have been victims of political violence in this country, and therefore acknowledging that is a first step. Even Succès Masra himself had to flee to the USA at some point when he joined hands with the civil society and to oppose, to stand against Idris Deby seeking for another term. And I think that is part of the issue of democracy in Africa broadly, and in the Sahel in particular, is that when you come to power, you forget that there's a continuity in the statecraft. That when you come over, whether you are elected or you came through a coup, you have to make sure that people who were at the receiving end of political violence from the state or state actors be heard. Until we really seek to begin to address those issues, we will go to the elections, we will elect parliamentarians, and they will come and reinforce their friends' powers. They will not be able to open the political game. I think that is it's the first point. And international organizations could contribute in that regard, not just in the terms of punishment, but in terms of even reinforcing the judicial system, giving it the independence that it needs to investigate, to punish at times or deter people from further committing the crimes that were committed in the past. I think that could be one element that international organizations still have that capacity, either threatening or calling to order, reminding people who are in affairs today that if things don't go well, tomorrow you could face justice.
Okay, let me come back to you, Dr. Antasani, right? So if you observe, we have a new president who is 40 years old. We go back to Senegal, 44 years old. So it seems like the young people in Africa are taking over. But the point is that we've seen young people take over in the past historically. During the National Movement Party for Independence, Kwame Nkrumah was probably in his 40s, Sekou Touré was in his 40s, Yoweri Museveni was also in his 40s. Then you come back to the post-independence aspect, we have Mugabe and all these people who were in their 40s, who were taking political positions. What makes these young people taking over different from what we have seen historically during the nationalist movement who fought for independence? during the democratic transition, which happened in the 1990s? What made Senegal and Chad so unique compared to what we have seen historically?
Thank you, Dr. Akwe. Most definitely, this is the first time in Senegal that we have a president who's 44 years old. He's the most young person that we have being elected. And we can see in Chad, when you look at the new president, he's also 40 years old. You look at the main opponent, Success Mazwa, who's also 40. So you see that a new wine is blowing across Africa, showing that more and more young people are actually winning elections. And when you look at the continent, whether slowly you're starting to see president, it's very timid, very slow. But if you look at other functions, mainly in the parliament, you can see a lot of differences in terms of young people being elected, or whether they're ministers as well, governors or senators or deputies, they all want to be represented at the political table. And what is interesting is you have young people who are actually using their voice to elect, like these young leaders. I take the example of Senegal, which we have now close to 70%, of the population is young people. So those were the ones who actually made sure that they have their card, their ID card, to be able to go vote. So they made it a priority and used their voice to elect someone who's young, because they believe that the young president will be able to basically take care of their issues, will understand as well where they're coming from. And if we look at some other parts, like in Africa, for instance, in Uganda, you have Proscovia, or Ayman, I think that's her name. She was 19 years old in 2012 when she became the youngest MPs in Uganda. South Africa also, you see young people being elected as, for instance, the main opposition leader in parliament back in 2011. So you have all of these examples that shows you that other young people, even in Nigeria, Ghana, whether Ivory Coast, Kenya, you see that slowly but surely showing a move towards a new generations, like coming up and leading, being part of what is at stake, like in their countries, to be able to lead. So it's a new voice, I think, new young voice. Once again, I say very timid, because it took us here, more than 50 years to be able to have this first president. But I believe it's a positive and good sign, because it shows that some more other people, young people, will actually take on the lead, and that can be replicated throughout the African continent, to have a new type of leadership as well, in terms of transparency, people who are governing and being in those positions, doing it for the right reason, doing it for their people, and ensuring that resources, natural resources, as well as financial ones, are used properly, not to be able to go towards programs or other people for their own good, but to actually go back to their people. So I think this new type of leadership around making sure that good governance and transparency are key issues to ensure that they are implemented with those young people being elected to ensure that we continue development in Africa.
All right, so thank you very much. Let me follow up with you, right? So like I was saying, what is different, right, in terms of what we see in Senegal, what we see in Chad, right? Young people in their 40s, like we said, the nationalist movement, there were young people who were involved in the 70s and the 80s. I can give a very good example of what? Paul Kagame. Paul Kagame came in power when he was in his 40s. What is so unique about these young people in terms of fighting corruption, instead of using these resources to the benefits of the people? What is so different about them compared to those in the nationalist movement and those that we saw in the 1990s? Dr. Asani. Unmute yourself, unmute yourself.
What is interesting is that African youth are politically active. African youth are politically inclined. They are interested in politics. They do politics. They seek to understand how they're being governed, how government actually run things. Unlike a few generations back when people might be disinterested and thinking that, well, politics happens on one side and life happens on the other side. There's a huge understanding today that politics is part of everyday life. And when you look at how youth in Senegal mobilized hugely everywhere to make sure that President Sall does not run for a third term. When you see how, despite the fact that Sonko was sent to jail, many other leaders were pushed aside and so on, the mobilization was there to tell them that, look, we hold this democratic process very, very dearly, and we're not going to let it go. Please believe me, but elsewhere, whether people are under military rule or whether they are under military dictatorship, the youth are still keen in the same way that you've seen the Senegalese youth mobilize. Youth elsewhere are mobilized that way. They might not have the space to express that kind of a desire for democracy, but the mobilization is there, the understanding is there, the interconnectedness is there. When there's an event happening in Sudan, people here in Burkina are watching it. They're using social media. They're seeing what is happening. So I know that if there is a political opening in this space in the next decade, perhaps in Cote d'Ivoire, we'll see a young person emerge out of all of this noise and and take over as a leader. Perhaps we'll see that coming in Ghana. Perhaps we'll see that in the coming years in Nigeria. We almost got it with the past elections when Peter Obi ran. You've seen the momentum that he brought. We might be seeing that even in places like Burkina Faso. If, as a matter of fact, if you see the mobilization behind the military, it is also part of the fact that it was run by a young person. If the guy who was in charge was actually a general, from a 60 years old general, you might not have seen the kind of mobilization that the Burkinabe did behind the leader. So, and I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing for Africa that youth are more and more open to running. They are more and more inclined to seeking to understand how the state of the affairs are and how countries are run. And I believe that when elsewhere there's a disinterest for elections, in the United States, you have to go door to door, knock at doors, mobilize people through rallies, go to schools, and so on and so forth. Here, oftentimes, we don't even need that. We just need to pass the information, and people are already aware, expecting, waiting. What is often missing is the political offer. What are politicians putting on the table and inviting youth to vote for that? That is what is sometimes weak. But the fact of the matter is that African youth are always politically keen, politically aware, and know what is happening and want to see things run in a certain way. And I think that it's a beautiful thing that we should continue to applaud.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Ante, you mentioned that these young people are interested in the resource of these countries being used for the benefit of the people. We've seen situations across the African continent. But some of these youth advocacy tend to be in conflict with Western foreign interests in terms of the exploitation of some of these resources. They believe that what these resources are taken away and are not used for the benefit of the citizens. And that tends to be in conflict because we know in 2022, ExxonMobil is out of what? Of China. So this youth advocacy tend to be in conflict with Western nation or Western interests. How do you proceed going forward in situations like that, where there's that conflict between what Western interest and what youth advocacy in the African continent?
Well, what you see nowadays, you see young people who do not want charity. Okay, people want their potential, okay, the potential of their countries to be unlocked. So that's why they're seeking this new type of leadership in order to be able to face most of the challenges that are linked to food security, demographics, like health, education, access to water, and all of that. So that's what you can sense and feel. They want a new type of leaders who will actually be able to use those finances and resources properly, that will go to the people who needs to benefit from it, the vulnerable people, as well as making sure that everyone actually in the country can benefit and can have a better future. And what I wanted to add as well was we need to think about as well that African population will be 1.6 billion by 2030. This is according to the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And young people will actually represent 42%. So that's huge. So that means that young people will need to really participate in politics, employment, and to global inclusion to be able, once again, to face all of those challenges. And if we look at the numbers, they're very scary as well in terms of what do we need to do, like with the youth, what type of programs we need to have for the youth in our countries. Because if you look at the African Development Bank, according to them, you have a third of Africa's 420 million young people from age 15 to 35 who are unemployed. And another third are actually in very precarious employment, and only 1 in 6 are in paid employment. So you think that the question of the youth employment is also at the center of the of development, and that's why the new leaders that we see emerging wants to ensure that most definitely the young people will have their lives changed as much as possible by making sure that we have right economics, a partnership, as well as socioeconomic transformation that are needed to change to change, like their lives positively. Okay.
All right, so let me follow up with understanding. If you look at Chad, for example, 60% of its revenue is coming from oil. But Chad is one of the poorest countries in the world. This has been as a result of what? Exploitation, right? How do you think this particular government will be able to change the fortune of the country? Don't forget, ExxonMobil is out. They are trying to bring in the Russians. They are trying to bring in what? The Iranians to come and compete over it. Do you think that is the best way to go forward for superpower competition in that particular country?
I think, in terms of the best approach when it comes to the economy, oftentimes my opinion is that it will be good when the Chadians decide who is in a better position to be a better partner for them. Because oftentimes when partnerships are signed under weak government, or under the tenure of corrupt and not so democratic governments, it's always never, almost always never in the best interest of the people. That is why we are seeing this new trend of undoing and rejecting previously established contracts, previously established, international organizations and companies, and bringing in new competition. To me, that trend is going to continue because, but at the same time, we have to be extremely careful to make sure that the new partners that are coming in are not also signing contract that will only benefit the kings of the day. So, and if there is transparency and any citizen can consult the terms and conditions of those contracts and, question the representatives in parliament, and parliament has an ability to bring in any partner and question them on how they are exploiting natural resources in the land, question them on how they are impacting the local ecology, for example, the environment, and so on and so forth. That would be most vital for the economy and for the nation. But until we have leaders that have that capacity, that vision to say that, okay, I am going to bring the Russians today, or I'm going to bring the Chinese in the best interest of the Chadian. I'm not bringing the Chinese or the Russian in the best interest of me and my friends. Until we arrive at that, well, international organizations are money-making businesses, and when they come in, they're coming in for business. They're not coming in because they love you. They're not coming in because they are friends with you. We have seen contracts in Burkina Faso recently gotten rejected simply because the terms and conditions are utterly bad. And these are Burkinabe politicians who signed those contracts alongside with French companies, allowing them to come in and build an airport in which they will be contributing for 30% of the value, the monetary value of building that airport. The French party will be contributing for 30% of that amount and will exploit that airport for 30 years, with Burkina Faso not allowed to open any airport during those 30 years. And who allowed that to happen? The French did not come and impose that upon us. No. Fellow Burkinabe allowed that to happen. Fellow Burkinabe sat around that table. So that is the tragedy with Africa. It's the belief, or should I say, the idea of Chad as a nation that has a future, the idea of a Ghana, of a nation as a nation that I would like to see my grandchildren raised in that nation. if current leaders do not embody that, you will not see it flourish. And I think that's where we need to be extremely careful with bringing in new partners. It's not so much about the nature or the ID card of that partner. I don't care about who is coming in, whether it's a Chinese, whether it's a Russian, whether it's an American, a French, a South African, a Moroccan, a Ghanaian coming into Chad to do business. No, they should all be able to come in as long as it's an open market. It's a neoliberal world whereby whoever is making the best offer should be able to win and help Chad develop Chad. But we have to be extremely careful here because sometimes those contracts are signed with clauses that are not disclosed. Perhaps, some partners are coming in and are given those contracts because they're going to be backing up that military regime and allowing them, well, it's no longer a military regime since they won the elections, but backing it despite, what the Chadians might desire for their future. If a regime is backed by interest, by neoliberal interest, economic interest, then democracies begin to fade away. And that is where I'm often dubious. I'm often cautious about those partnerships. If you put that aside, I have no problem, for example, with Chad bringing in the Russians or bringing in the Americans or bringing in the Chinese.
Okay, thank you very much. Doctor, as I said, if you are there, right, time is fast spent, right? What do you think, what are the prospects of the new Chadian government success? What do you see going forward?
Oh, Dr. Akwe, is it for me? Can you repeat it, please?
I'm saying that what do you see in terms of the prospects of the new president of Chad, right? Trying to create a democracy which will be very inclusive of all political parties for the development of the country. Looking into the crystal ball.
I believe I will say that definitely the dialogue, calling on for a national consultation, with all the actors to really figure out what type of reforms needs to be implemented in various sectors, including all infrastructure, education, and employment, as well as strengthening security and resilience as well to climate change. Because the Chad's economy, if we go back to these past few years, has been volatile and has been largely dependent on the oil sector, as you mentioned. And in the last 2 decades, we've seen that episodes of strong growth have followed significant increases in oil prices or the end of a major conflict. And Chad has developed its oil sector under very difficult conditions, as we saw with the instability, like civil war, did not have basic infrastructure in oil-producing regions. So oil revenue management, I believe, as well, can be improved including from the government expenditures as well as from the revenues side. And when it comes to economic infrastructures, I believe that through that dialogue, because what that will allow this dialogue is to see what can be done um, in the future for Chad to be able to do better. So I believe that the country needs to increase its access to physical capital, meaning human development is also very important in there to be able to impact business development positively. Um, the infrastructure as well that will support basic services, like to those living underserved areas where you don't have that. Because the cost of infrastructure, as we know, is very expensive for countries, but it's important as well um, to ensure to do that, to reduce so that the country's attractiveness and competitiveness cannot be reduced. As well as looking into skills and labor mobility will also another good important topic in the future for this government, because you see that most of the low-skilled or less educated workers sometimes make up the labor workforce, and they're trapped into the least productive sectors. So those are maybe some examples that I believe need to be looked into deeply, and various reforms taking place by inviting all the actors to actually think about these, proposing some solutions and recommendations that hopefully will be implemented to better Chad's people's life there.
All right, thank you very much. Let me go briefly to Dr. Lasani, right? In terms of regional security, we see what is happening in Central African Republic. We see also what is happening in Libya. We see what is currently happening in the Sudan, right? How would Chad be able to navigate all these conflicts around itself to be able to internally manage its own domestic differences?
I think that oftentimes what we are asking from the Chadian government, honestly, and saying this, I feel bad saying it personally, but I think what we expect from the Chadian government is often a little bit unfair for President Deby to come in and everything is going to be good and stable, and democracy is flourishing, and development is, all the indicators are good and everything, forgetting that Chad has been enmeshed in a conflict for generations. There's some children in Chad who have never seen peace until they have gotten old. They have never lived in a community where it's peaceful. And Deby had inherited a nation that is very, very, very divided, a nation that is at war, a nation that is fighting against terrorism, a nation that has borders with some of the most unstable nations. And at the same time, it has to deal with international geopolitical issues that are transposed or are being transposed into Chad. When France quickly moved into back President Chad after his fathers died, I think France did not do this simply because France cared about Chad. It did it primarily because it understood and it has a good understanding that French interests could be threatened if, first of all, there's no stable office in Jamena. And the only folk in this current situation to be able to hold Chad seemingly together might be the military, for better or worse. That's one point. the USA is being kicked out of Niger, is negotiating terms and conditions to move its military into Chad. And that is another layer of political friction, because a lot of people in Chad actually mobilized at some point asking for France to remove its military base from Chad. And here we have our American friends who still don't understand, or are refusing to understand that things are moving. But you're being kicked out of Niger and you're moving in there because they understand that they need to be there. They need to be in the zone. And my fear is the friction that comes with when international, super powerful nations are fighting proxy wars in your nation or in your background. You look down in the Chadian map and you see that the Lake Chad Basin bordering with Nigeria is not safe. The bordering with the Central African Republic is not safe either. And you look a little bit down, you have Gabon, whereby Ali Bongo, the father was in power for 30 years or, almost 3 decades, and the son came in and stayed there for all of his time. And then the military has taken over and we barely know what they're doing and where they're headed to. So the confidence level in terms of leadership in that entire bloc is quite problematic, and it has effects on Chad. And you look on the other side, you have Algeria, well, maybe a little bit far, but Libya, which is a mess, Niger, all the way to Mali, whereby you have some sort of a problematic situation going on there. So I think what President Deby could do is to sit down and say, look, things are not what we want them to be today. You might not agree with how I won this election, but for the sake of maintaining this nation together, let's come together. I will join my co-panelist, Dr. Sane, when she talks about some sort of a national dialogue. I think it's a necessity for Chad to come together, because he cannot lead the way his father led Chad anymore. Because when you do that internally, you will find folk who can, find support elsewhere. And it's not going to be, business as usual. So the best course of action here is to seek internal stability. And that internal stability comes in with dialogue. I really very much liked the connection with, the bringing back Success Masra home, even giving him the capacity to lead a government, and perhaps doing the same kind of opening with the other leaders, the other opposition leaders that actually, some of them boycotted the election, did not take part in this election. Some of them are outside of Chad, allowing them to come back in. Negotiating truce for the sake of Chad might be a way forward, national unity. Chad needs that more than ever, because terrorism is expanding, and when they're getting kicked out in Niger, or they have to find another place to go. When they're getting kicked out from northern Mali, you don't want to have division, internal division. And when there's internal division, you're not going to be able to hold things together. And I think that's where the task at hand is not going to be easy for President Deby, although he got elected, but the story does not end there.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so we've come to the end of the program, but I wanted to have your closing remarks, taking into consideration what your African experts, like some of us, right, who are very familiar with some of these issues, what role can we play in terms of dialogue, right? Because we are young people, we're now having a young generation of African leaders. What role can we play in terms of trying to help resolve some of these issues? Let's start with you, Dr. Anderson first. You have been involved in Senegal, so you should know, so you know some of these things. What role should your expert, consultants, civil society organizations play in terms of promoting peace and security in some of these African
countries? What should be done is to make sure that there's a platform for dialogue and communication. It's key because that's what's going to help everybody to be on the same page, being able for everyone to be on the table, the main actors, and have a voice for them to actually talk about issues openly, freely, without thinking of any repressions that can happen to them. So I believe it's key. And once they have trust that that can happen, then I believe that can really in the future help to set more understanding about what is happening and what is at stake within the countries. Because most of the time, and what we've seen mainly, young people have been used. I know here, for instance, in Senegal, many did not appreciate the fact that in the past elections, you will see young people being used to actually mobilize. And they do it very well. But at the end of the day, when it comes to being able to have high responsibility functions, you don't see them around the table. And we talk about young people's issues without hearing their voices, what they have to say. So I believe by taking early steps to actually involve them and have like a platform where they can openly voice their concerns and issues that will be better and that will help us to actually have more of their concerns being taken care of.
All right, thank you very much. Right, Dr. Lasani, you have the final word. We know on the African continent, young people use mobile phones in getting news, but you can be in Ghana, something is happening in China, and people don't really care about it. People are so impatient. It's happening. The point is, how can young people around the continent, right, engage more to be able to know what is really happening in order for us to be able to find what you call what an integrated and consensus in terms of resolving some of the conflicts. Right? Dr. Anta just mentioned platforms where people can come and express their views to talk about issues. What other things do you think we can do in terms of mobilizing young people in the various African countries to be involved in finding solutions to the problems in the various African countries?
I think as educators, we should work toward integrating Africa beyond the artificial, beyond, when I look at the popular music in Nigeria and how it has succeeded to defend or portray Nigeria elsewhere across Africa, like even in Francophone Africa, youth listen to Nigerian music. And through that kind of art, they're able to have a certain understanding of what Nigerianness is all about. What is the predicament of Nigerian people becomes something of concern for them. Same thing could be done on the literary ground. For example, in our education platforms, in our classrooms, we make it a point to introduce literature from the other nations, because the problem is that when you go to the diaspora, Africans actually learn to know Africans when they meet in the USA, when they meet in England, when they meet in France. But here, when on the continent, oftentimes we do not know each other. And that's a failure of our education systems, whereby as a high school student, I would learn, I'll read about Shakespeare, I'll read about French literary giants, but I want to read about Pra, for example, Professor Pra. I want to read about Ama Koi. I want to read about Achebe. That is the problem of Africa. And I think if we are to really build an Africa whereby anything that is happening in Sudan, I would sit in Burkina and consider it something that is going to impact me. I would only do that through knowing the people behind the flag that we call Sudan. Sometimes people in sports do it better. You know, when Drogba was playing, when Eto'o is playing, everybody knows Cameroon through that player. Everybody knows Cote d'Ivoire through Didier Drogba. Today, when we say Sadio Mane, whether you're living in South Africa or you're living in Ethiopia, you know how to reference him back. I think we should do the same thing on when it comes to literature, when it comes to history, when it comes to civilizations and culture. And oftentimes that is missing, honestly. And in our history curricula, oftentimes we don't teach anything about the other nations. I am shocked when I meet a Ghanaian who tells me, "Oh, is Burkina Faso near?" Or I'm shocked when I talk to Burkinabe about, say, about Nigeria or about Togo, and they say, and they don't know where Togo is. You see what that means if you do not understand the history, the basic history of the people who are just near you. How would you care about weapons being smuggled in? How would you care about rebel groups rising up? How would you care about children getting kidnapped? And I think in our public education system, and maybe we should also extend that to media, you know, and media scholars and media people talking on mainstream media, to at some point say, well, we have one Africa, you know, when we take an African people from the southern part of the continent, and we begin to unpack their history, we begin to unravel where they come from, and we begin to look at the cultures closely, we'll quickly see that there is the same practice that is being done by the Asante people in Ghana, or the same thing is being done by the Fulani people in Guinea, and so on and so forth. Until we come to that kind of opening, we will not find relevance in issues that are happening across the continent. And sadly, I think at our leadership level too, oftentimes they lack that kind of understanding. If you are to look at the recent development in our region, for example, the coup d'etat in Niger and the unfolding crisis and how ECOWAS got entangled in between. If the ECOWAS leaders, the current ECOWAS leaders, had a better understanding of the histories that are linking the people from these nations, the matters would have been resolved differently.
Right.
We wouldn't have the necessity to mobilize, to go to France or discuss mobilizing weapons. We would simply take the women caucus within ECOWAS and send them to Niger and call those military khaki-wearing boys and tell them, sit down. What are you doing here? Okay, you have done the coup d'etat and taken over. What is next? Sit down, let's talk. We are your mothers, sit down. They will listen, they would eventually come to a solution. But oftentimes we're lacking that kind of perspective, thinking that the solution is elsewhere. The solution is not taking the phone, calling the USA. It's not taking the phone and calling France. It's not taking the phone and calling the Russians. It is knowing ourselves and discussing among ourselves and determining what are our issues and how can we best resolve them. So that would be my closing submission on that question.
Thank you very much. You make a very interesting observation, right? I'm not a fan of soccer since I left Africa and came to the US. I've been watching basketball, right? But when Sadio Mane was in Liverpool, right, I developed this interest in him, and since then it's like, okay, he went to Bayern Munich. I'm following him, right? Still watching him. And all of a sudden, he's back to the Arabian League in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not really known for soccer, right? But here's the case. Saturday morning when I get up, I'm watching Saudi Arabia football. Because now the sport is a platform. So you are absolutely right about that, which we use the literal arts, education, everything, to be able to know what is really going in the African continent. Just the mere fact that he's a Senegalese, he won the African Cup, I've been following it all around. And early Saturday morning, I have to get up and be watching Saudi League just because of I want to see Sergio Mane. Right. So you are absolutely right about it. Thank you so much, right, for this program. We appreciate you coming up. We are sorry for Dr. Idris Mohammed. I think he's having internet issues already. He told me he was sick yesterday. He was just discharged from the hospital. Dr. Najib, I don't know why he didn't join, but let's hope that maybe we'll get in touch and send a video around. We'll look forward to getting engaged with you in the upcoming series. Next week, we'll be looking at another election situation. We know South Africa election is coming on the 25th. We had opportunity to discuss it. Maybe we have to go back. We are all looking forward to maybe the opposition, the EFF, making a good showing this time, right? Because of some of the unemployment challenges that the ANC is having. So let's get engaged. Let's have a platform. Let's keep this discussion going. The way of trying to help resolve some of the conflicts on the African continent. We've tried to reach out to the ECOWAS, right? We are still engaging ECOWAS. We are still engaging the African Union on some of these issues. And we hope that they will be open to come to the program to discuss some of these issues with us, right? I'm currently talking to the Peace and Security Council of the ECOWAS Secretariat, also talking with the Peace and Security. So we hope that in our subsequent work program, they'll be able to come to the program to educate us some of the things that they are doing, to keep us abreast with what is actually happening, not for me and you. Maybe you probably know the issues, but there are a lot of people out there who do not really know what is going on in the country. And we can use these media platforms that Dr. Antat shared, sports literally act to be able to get all this what happened. So on this note, thank you to all of you, and to thank you to our listeners on Facebook, the Global Social Media platform. We hope to see you next week, Friday, edition of the so-called African. Please have a nice weekend and enjoy whatever holidays or whatever days are coming. So see you next week on the African. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Sen, good to meet you. And thank you so much for bringing all of us together.
All right. Thank you very much.
To meeting you, and thank you, Dr. Atway, for this nice platform. I'm looking forward for the other programs. Thank you so much.
Thank you.